above and beyond schizophrenia. So in this video, we're going to take a look at this article. Are we ready for a name change for schizophrenia? So a survey of multiple stakeholders. So as you know, may have known, they're trying to change the name schizophrenia. They want to change the name schizophrenia to something else. And this is looking at the reasons for that and what are some of the name changes that they're pondering and their hopes of what they hope to gain from all this stuff. So I want to look at that and maybe hear what some of you guys think. But first, my new mic. I forgot to introduce it in my last video. I think it was my first time. Was my previous video was the first time I have it because I used to have a different mic before, and this one is better. The other one I never had a stand, so I had to put it on some books and I gotta hold it up there, and I gotta hold it in my hand, and I didn't really like it. This one I can move it in, I can move it out, I can move it up, I can move it down, I can do all kinds of stuff, so I feel real professional. So I like this one. It's a lot better. So anyways, here's Mike. Mike, say hi. Hi. All right, here we go. Let's get rolling here. So this is an abstract. Was it Science Direct? It's from. I'm gonna put the link in the description box so you can read it for yourselves. Okay, so about 1 in 100 people worldwide are diagnosed with schizophrenia. Many people advocate for a name change for the condition, pointing to the stigma and discrimination associated with the term schizophrenia, as well as to how the name poorly characterizes features of the illness. The purpose of this project was to collect opinions from a broad, diverse sample of stakeholders about possible name changes for schizophrenia. The project represented a partnership between researchers, clinicians, and those with lived experiences with psychosis. The group developed a survey to assess opinions about the need for change in the name schizophrenia as well as potential alternate names. We accumulated 1,190 responses from a broad array of community stakeholders, including those with lived experience of mental illness, family members, clinicians, researchers, government officials, and the general public. Findings indicate that the majority of respondents, which is 74.1%, favored a name change for schizophrenia. Most, this is just backward. Like, what the heck? 74.1%, 71. A majority of the respondents, 74.1%, favored a name change, right, for schizophrenia, and 74.1% found the name stigmatizing. Like, is this a mistake or is this just flip the numbers around? That's weird. A happy coincidence, baby. Of the proposed alternate names, those with the most support included altered perception syndrome, okay, psychosis spectrum syndrome, okay, altered perception syndrome, psychosis spectrum syndrome, because there's a spectrum to it, and neuro-emotional integration disorder, okay, neuro-emotional integration disorder. Survey findings provide strong support for renaming schizophrenia. Most expressed hope that the name change will reduce stigma and discrimination. I think from that standpoint, if we are looking at it from the standpoint of the stigma and discrimination that can occur with a diagnosis such as schizophrenia, I think that's a worthwhile endeavor, right? I think that needs to be looked at, and I'm not opposed to that in any sense. I do think there is a lot of misunderstanding with schizophrenia and can carry a lot of stigma and I guess discrimination. People use the word schizophrenia to describe any kind of inconsistent behavior, I guess. Just somebody who may, like I see it online, somebody who will write an argument, argue with somebody, they'll write an argument one way, and then the next time it'll be maybe something inconsistent with that, and people say, oh, you're schizophrenic, man, what kind of schizophrenic thing is this? You know what I mean? It's just people just toss it out like that, just as a derogatory term, and and that doesn't necessarily mean that they are uh, referring. I mean, the person may have schizophrenia, but maybe not. But I don't think it's always in the sense that they're intentionally discriminating or anything negative against somebody. It's just they use that word as an insult to somebody, right? It's like calling someone a cancer patient, which, believe it or not, some people do that, right, in order to uh, uh, use that to insult them, right? So it's kind of similar in this regards. Does that mean they have any kind of hatred for people with cancer? Probably not. It's just they use it like that, right? So, but still, it's not a cool thing to do. So, the term schizophrenia, literally meaning split mind, was initially introduced by Eugene Bleuler in the early 20th century. I don't know if I said that name right, but it's one of those things. Like, you ever seen Army, the Army of the Dead, where he had to go and say the Necronomicon correct? I think it was Necronomicon. Yeah, yeah. I think that's what you have to do. He had to say it correct before he takes it off the thing, and he didn't know to pronounce it. So it's like, he just negro. It's like, yeah, I said your word, And then he took the book, and then this curse came on him. But that's like that's kind of me pronouncing these names. Uh, so while our understanding of the neurobiological basis of this illness and approaches to the treatment have dramatically evolved, the term schizophrenia has persisted in our diagnostic nomenclature. Schizophrenia does little to accurately illustrate, so that's the name schizophrenia, does little to accurately illustrate the underlying neurobiology of the symptoms experienced by those living with the disorder, and is descriptively misleading in conveying that there is a single entity involved. The term has been adopted to describe any erratic, volatile behavior and has become associated with violence, hopelessness, and desperation, leading to distorted public perception, discrimination, and prejudice. These attitudes negatively affect the lives of people living with the disorder, as higher levels of self-reported stigma are linked to less social interaction and lower levels of recovery, vocational functioning, and quality of life. To address these issues, the mental health community has considered renaming the term schizophrenia. Whew. Now, let me say, I was going to wait till I get to the end of this, but I might as well just deal with this as I arrive at it. The term schizophrenia literally meaning split mind, and listen to what this says. This is where I kind of have some disagreement, though, because they say it does little to accurately illustrate the neurobiology or the symptoms experienced by those living with the disorder. But I don't know about the neurobiology, which is more the chemical imbalances that they say. But what I do know is that schizophrenia, meaning split mind, is a very accurate description of what the illness is. Right? I don't know how much insight this person had when he coined this term, but he was very accurate, very, very accurate with that term, right? And again, schizophrenia, when it's a split mind, is not split personality per se. It is more a disconnect from reality. But I'd even go further than that, right? It's not even that how, this is why it's not even that alone why I say it's accurate. It's more so, and I don't know if this person, maybe that person, when he coined that term, this was also what he meant. I'm not sure, but I've read about the split from reality, but also it's more like, it's like literally like a split mind, right? Because your mind, you're one person before, right? if you're listening to this, you're stable. You understand who you were before schizophrenia. If you remember, uh, and family members, your loved ones who they were before schizophrenia, right? There's certain character with it. They had, they may have little insecurities, but they're fun, they're outgoing, they're this, they're that. They were doing things. They're going to school, they're talking to their buddies, and they're going along all right. And then schizophrenia comes, and it's like the person who you knew was no longer there. It was somebody else, right? It's not necessarily somebody else, but it's like they're reflecting a different mind. You're outgoing, now you're isolated. Now you're the people you loved and you trust and confided in, now you don't trust them. You think they're out to get you. Your mom's trying to poison you. The cops are bugging your radio or your house or whatever the heck it is. You know, someone trying to poison you. There's witchcraft on your bed, right? If you sleep on your bed, as my case, if you sleep on your bed, you're gonna die. If you fall asleep, you're gonna die. You're accusing people of being witches and demons and things like that. All kinds of all kinds of things. You're paranoid. You're delusional. It's like you're totally not the person who they knew. There's a different mind. It's a different person now. Erratic, unstable, talking all kinds of paranoia nonsense. It literally is a split mind. You're no longer that person, right? And now you take medication, and now you're able to kind of connect back to that mind, but you're not fully there because those other things are still. It's like there's a merger. There's you now, and then there's still the symptoms that are now playing in the background, so to speak. And sometimes the meds, you don't connect to them as much, right? So I think that name is a very accurate name, right? So, it doesn't necessarily characterize all the symptoms, but it characterizes the nature of what's happening. And I think that's far more accurate than just because you can't put all the symptoms in any one name. But split mind, and when you look into that, it has a whole world of symptoms and experiences and so forth like that, because it's like you're separated from that person and take on a different mind, right? Sometimes they might say it's a beautiful mind. uh, but also the yeah, it does. The term has been adopted to describe any yeah, this is what I was talking about, where people can just use that name to uh, use to insult people or to just characterize anybody who goes through these kind of experiences and say that they're uh, schizophrenic, right? Like, just because you're hopeless doesn't mean you feel hopeless, doesn't mean you're schizophrenic, doesn't mean like you feel a desperation or depression or whatever. Doesn't mean you are there's a schizophrenia there. But people with schizophrenia can also uh, show produce these erratic, volatile behavior, and can become violent and subject to feelings of hopelessness and desperation and despair and all kinds of stuff, right? So, which is the same thing, but and then which is what gives you the prejudice and so forth, right? So, um, people live. Okay, so these attitudes, higher levels of self-reported stigma are linked to less assault. Yeah, so when you get stigmatized by that, you don't want to. It can make you want to not move somewhere in society. And that's why a lot of people don't disclose that they have schizophrenia, is because sometimes you lose friends, right? Sometimes you lose friends because family members may not want to deal with you. Someone's a bit scary, wary of you. Oh, I don't know what this person gonna lose their mind and decide to attack me, right? So that's the kind of perception. Even though there is sometimes you can be violent, it's not the primary characteristics of someone suffering with schizophrenia. It's actually something that might come, at later on, or I guess maybe can happen primary. It just depends on the situation, individual. But for the most people, most part, it's characterized by fear, right? You're fearful rather than violent, right? You're more afraid of somebody than they should be of you, right? But that stuff can manifest. It can change. That attitude can change, right? So there's more to it. There's depths. There's depths to this thing. It's not just one level. There's depths to it. So data from the World Psychiatric Association suggests that approximately half of mental health professionals around the world believe schizophrenia needs a new label, and over half believe the term is stigmatizing. So here, this is surprising though. It says approximately half. Wow, you'd think that with something like that, and vast majority would support a new name. And even with the 74.1% of people who maybe opt for a new name of patients as our stakeholders, whatnot, then what happened to the rest? Maybe are they unreluctant or more reluctant like me, who kind of just say, like there's good and there's, I don't know if I'm reluctant, but it's just I do have I do have questions and uh, maybe different look at it, I guess. But I wouldn't say I'm reluctant, because I do think if it helps with people feeling more confident in coming forward and kind of getting help and helping with the stigma and discrimination, then yeah, I'm all for it. But I just wonder what was some of the other stakeholders' concerns with the name change. They didn't really talk about that. Well, maybe they will. So, what was I? Okay, so a study in France describes psychiatrists' reluctance to send youth to early intervention clinics in part due to fears of mislabeling patients as having schizophrenia, right? Well, because there's the stigma, right? They don't want them to have face a stigma. Further, a recent survey of Italian psychiatrists noted that 49% of psychiatrists surveyed did not use the term schizophrenia when talking to their patients, primarily due to stigma. Hmm. Okay. So then, okay, maybe they have something else that they use, I guess, to kind of help them to understand what they're struggling with. This survey also found that more than half of mental health service users and family members believe the term is stigmatizing, and over 75% believe it should be renamed due to stigma. Okay, renamed due to stigma, not necessarily about how accurate the name is in describing what's happening, but more the stigma, which I can understand that. As somebody who lived with schizophrenia, and have, my mom had lost a friend because my mom asked her to pick me up from work if she could, because my mom didn't drive and my sister wasn't able to pick me up that time. I forgot where my sister was, but anyway, my sister usually picked me up, so she asked a friend, and her friend was like, "No, she wouldn't want to do it because she was afraid of me," even though I've never been a particularly violent person in my life, right? So, but they were afraid of me simply because my mom had told them that I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, right? And so there's the stigma, right, where people just have this negative perspective, even though I would probably be more suspicious of this woman than she would have been of me. I would have been like, just, I don't trust you, I gotta go, but I would be like wary of her attacking me, not so physically, but just verbally with the auditory hallucinations, right? But that's the thing. People, they're afraid of me and I'm afraid of them. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? That's how it goes though, right? It's just, we can't read each other's minds, but, it's just interesting that if you can understand people's mind, you'll, you'll see just how comical it is in some sense, right? They're afraid of me and I'm afraid of them, right? And yet neither of us want to hurt each other. So proponents of renaming schizophrenia express hope that using an alternate term will alter the public image of the condition, reducing stigma and increasing awareness. Stakeholders closely connected to this disorder express a readiness to adopt a new term to reduce stigma and point to successful name changes for other psychiatric conditions such as manic depressive illness to bipolar disorder. Okay. Multiple personality disorder to dissociative identity disorder and mental retardation to intellectual disability. Similarly, some highlight the broader societal context in which names have shifted and have taken on an especially potent role in culture more generally. Example, lunatic to crazy nuts slash nuts, right? To mental health disorders, to psychosocial challenges, to neurodiversity. The field has also shown some readiness to adopt changes in terminology and conceptualization of schizophrenia. That's interesting. Conceptualization. Now, how are you going to change the conceptualization of schizophrenia? Like, that's interesting. I'm curious to what they're going to. The two major schizophrenia journals have revised their titles to include the following editions. Schizophrenia Bulletin added the Journal of Psychosis and Related Disorders, and Schizophrenia Research added a translational journal to the psychosis spectrum. The DSM-5, I think that's Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5, the fifth edition, I guess, revised the section schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders to schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders, right? Because schizophrenia spectrum is going to make me think that it's not schizophrenia. It's not the same thing as schizophrenia. But hey, whatever. Okay, to schizophrenia. Okay. The New England Journal of Medicine, which regularly publishes updates on schizophrenia, recently changed the topic to psychotic disorders. On the other hand, critics cite concerns such as lack of evidence of the benefits of the name change, the potential for confusion among care providers, and the possibility that a new name may incorrectly imply that a clearer understanding of the disorder has been discovered. So, the evidence of, so there's lack, I guess they're saying there's lack of evidence of the benefits of the name change, and that's going to come with time, right? Like, you're going to only discover that with time as there's a real change. But I think if you understand it, like maybe more so with the younger generation, you might really see that name change, the benefits of it. But for people who are, right now who have that awareness of what schizophrenia is, and then you hear this new name, and you hear the symptoms, like you're gonna be like, oh, is that schizophrenia? I'm like, yeah, but that's the old name. So you end up going back to the same understanding and the same situation, right? So, and the potential for confusion among care providers, I would think care providers would be aware of this because you would have to give them an update on what the new name is, right? So I don't know how that would be confusion, as long as they're kept in the loop and understand when you get a patient with whatever new name they put, then it'll for them they'll have that update that it's also with schizophrenia. So then it becomes, it's the name's gonna still it's gonna still carry on for a bit, right, until everyone catches up. So the possibility, okay. So then the possibility of a new name may incorrectly imply that a clearer understanding of the disorder has been discovered, which I guess it hasn't. A clearer understanding hasn't been discovered. So it's still split mind. You're still split from reality, and you're still separated from the old mind with the new mind, right? So I definitely understand that those are legitimate concerns, legitimate things, but do those concerns outweigh the concern of the stigma and the discrimination, right? I think those are far more weightier, and so I would say they don't. So the caution that changing the name could, without effectively changing how people conceptualize the disorder, will be ineffective in reducing stigma. Exactly, right? Because once people realize that, oh, it's schizophrenia, which you start to tell people what these symptoms are: hallucinations, paranoia, disorganized thinking, uh, all these things, right? Like, you're going to have people say, "Hey, isn't that schizophrenia?" And then you're gonna be back to square one. So that's definitely a legitimate concern. So I don't know if they really address that. Well, but I do think the hopes is that as it passes down to the next generations, that you'll see the effects of it. While the term schizophrenia persists in Western cultures, some Asian countries have adopted new diagnostic terms. In Japan, they change from split mind disease to integration disorder. So, integration disorder, that's interesting. Hmm. Reduced negative, so changing this name from split disease to integration disorder, reduced negative associations with the diagnosis, attributions of the dangerous, oh, okay, reduce negative associations with diagnosis, attributions of the dangerousness and negative news coverage about the illness, so reduced all those things, as well as increased the endorsements of biopsychosocial cause. So yeah, I guess, right, if you can get more, and that's one of the things where, and it's another article I want to look at uh, where organizations with the name schizophrenia don't get as much funding as some of the other organizations, right? So which is what they, I won't look at it in this video, but they thought this might help. They think this might help in people more willing to donate and to take more interest in some of the causes that they're for, like this in the cause of schizophrenia, right? With the name change, because I guess schizophrenia is not a sexy name. It ain't sexy, right? Like your cancer or some of your diabetes or certain things that it's not mental. It doesn't affect your look in reality, your understanding reality, and so forth, right? Like, but with those other things, people tend to be more um, willing to support, right? So yeah, I can understand that. Likewise, South Korea's adoption of attunement disorder, decreased prejudice and stigma. Following the name changes in both Japan and South Korea, more clinicians were willing to disclose schizophrenia diagnosis to patients. That's very interesting, right? Because you'd think as a provider, you would be more willing, you'd be willing in general to disclose this to the patients who are suffering, because listen, it's not when things are safe and you feel confident and easy that this is important, where it's more beneficial to the patient. It's when things are not comfortable, because if you as a clinician who is making progress in your life to the fact that you can be there as a clinician, you have this diagnosis, and if you're uncomfortable because of the stigma and so forth, and then imagine what that patient is facing, who sees that there's no future for them, right? They don't see any hope. Their life is done pretty much. And to know that there is hope, because if you in that seat could struggle and could move forward even in spite of this illness, then that would give them some hope. This is when it would be more necessary, right? As opposed to now that, okay, stigma is calmed down, everybody's it's all safe. Now I can tell you, oh yeah, I suffer from schizophrenia too, or whatever you call it. Then it's like it doesn't have the same impact, right? Which is what courage is a thing that you need in order to struggle against schizophrenia. You have to. It's an illness that try to instill fear in your mind, but in which the opposite of fear is courage, right? And so you need courage in order to really make grounds in the struggle. But here, even when these clinicians who are in that position where they are able to show that courage and to stand up and to put themselves out there so that they can help their patients, they refuse to do that until it's safe to do so, and that's really tragic in my eyes, right? I don't like that at all. I mean, I understand, I guess, the faith and stigma, but in your position, I think, uh, helping the patient is far more, providing hope is far more important than whatever stigma, you know. Um, I don't know, I don't know. Yeah, anyway. So, and an increased number of patients were willing to seek out treatment regimens. So I can understand that for the patients wanting to seek out treatment when it's not the stigma is not there as much because they're the one that they don't know that there's hope. They're still suffering and they want hope. So, but now it's easier for them because they don't face those things. But before it was difficult, and to have that hope from the clinician would have been a real confidence booster. I would think, but However, meaningful change in public attitudes in South Korea has been hindered by the general public and media's difficulties to understanding the term, frequently reverting to the previous label exactly, which is why they need a new conceptualization. Because once you start to conceptualize it, you start to talk to people about it, describe it, then you're going to have to go back to the old understanding uh, of the symptoms, which now is going to bring back to schizophrenia, right? So, but if you don't want to keep that connection, you can't talk about the symptoms. You just got to use a name, and now no one's going to understand what the heck this is. So you run into a bit of a road, um, a conundrum, I guess. So yeah, which is why they're frequently reverting to the previous label because it now people can understand. You know, um, attunement disorder. What the heck? Attunement is well, is that what they call schizophrenia before? And oh, that's what it is, huh? Okay, they just changed the name. Okay, that's what happens. So similarly, a name change to disorder thought and uh, perception in Hong Kong and Taiwan has not altered negative wording in newspaper articles. A recent study in Europe has suggested a preference among stakeholders to drop the same schizophrenia. However, studies in this issue have not been reported from the US and are critically needed. Right? And this goes to what those doctors were saying, those clinicians, doctors that were concerns about if the name change will have any effect in the public perception. And I guess right now, anyways, they're right. It really, or at least their concern is valid because it apparently doesn't in the public sphere, on the newspaper sphere. Because like I said, when you're communicating that, you got to go back to the old understanding. So, and because there's no new understanding, you can't go to new ways of characterizing it, right? So mental health professionals suggest that a successful name change should be clearly defined, neutral, easily understood, and illustrate the core symptoms of the disorder in order to increase accessibility and communicability by healthcare providers, right? So that's the thing. That's going to be a tough one, right? But with those names, I guess you can, you can still say that some of these names are in a way describe it, but once you start communicating the symptoms again, disagreement exists on how to best satisfy these criteria. For example, there are different vectors along which to consider new names. Example, description of the history, phenomenology, etiology of the illness, and or stigma reduction. These vectors may or may not be mutually reinforcing, and it is unclear what best reduces stigma. The newness of a name or something about the name itself. The newness of a name or about the name, a name itself that reduces stigma. Um, yeah, probably both, maybe. As was found in a recent Italian study, clinicians propose alternatives range from six broad categories: integration failure, lack of unity in mental processes, organizational failure, inability to connect with reality, terms related to psychosis, and terms suggesting a spectrum. Right? So I guess, okay, so they want to drop all those paranoid, delusions and hallucinations and so forth like that. They want to drop those to these uh, integration field, lack of unity in mental processes. Well, what does that mean exactly? Organization failure. Well, describe that to me. Inability to connect with reality. Well, what does that? What does that? What does that mean? So eventually you're gonna. It still boils down to describing the symptoms in their form, right? In their action. So this study gathered opinions of psychiatrists, service users, and family members, but the sample size was limited with little diversity and restricted to the three aforementioned stakeholders groups. More research about these opinions is vital, particularly in the US where the issue hasn't been studied, as consensus of any new name should ideally be derived from a large, diverse sample of all relevant stakeholders. No, I don't really know. Okay, the study sought to accomplish these goals by measuring the opinions of a broad, diverse. Okay, so just kind of talk about that, but I don't know what it is in Canada either. Like what are they? We're probably the same place where the U.S. is, because Canada, we love to follow the U.S. That's how we do it over here. Um, but it's very interesting, man. Very interesting what they're trying to do. I think there's a lot of um, personally, man. I don't know. I think from the stigma to the discrimination and so forth, I can agree with that. But I think from an accurate standpoint, I think schizophrenia is a great name. Actually, I think it's perfect for what this illness is. But I do think people who have the biggest issue with the name schizophrenia are those who more identify themselves with the illness, right? Speaking of the patients, and I can understand family members, because as a family member, you don't, especially if you live like maybe in more so in the Asian community, because for them it's like shame to the family in some sense, right? Like they hear that and it's like, oh, and even in some places here too, Western families, and I know even in the Jamaican, it can be that way as well, right? People make it about them rather than the person suffering, right? So when you have the term schizophrenia, they think it's a reflection of the family, reflection of me, and my genes, and my this and my that, and it's seldom about the patient's needs and how it reflects on the patient, right? So it's really from a selfish standpoint from a lot of us. Now, some family also, it's more so of like more in my mom's situation is more like, okay, it's more how their child is being viewed, how their brother, their sister is being viewed, and so they think about that from that perspective, right? There's also that kind of it, but a lot of it is just more from a selfish reasons why they are looking at it from, right? It's more how it's gonna reflect on me and our family. That's why they keep it secret and they don't want to talk about it, because but now with the name change, it can mean something different, and they can be more open to discussing it, right? And then, but for the patients, I think when it comes to us, it's more for us who have identified ourselves with the illness, and so in order for us to feel more comfortable with our identity in bringing that out, we want to make that name change for that because, you know, a person like me, I never cared about having schizophrenia, the diagnosing me of schizophrenia. I did not care one bit, right? Because this wasn't my destination. You understand? This is only a season. So, you diagnose me with schizophrenia is just, okay, whatever. You know, like all that lets me know is the name that you want to put over, label the experiences I'm having. Fine. But that name doesn't describe me. That's not the mind I have. Yeah, it's split mind. This is the mind, the energy that is prevailing here. But that's not the mind I intend to keep. You know what I mean? So call it whatever you want. I'm passing through. You know, but when you make this thing, you set your build your house here, and you're gonna live here. Of course, you want to be comfortable. Of course, you want to be comfortable. Of course, you don't want to have any kind of negative connotations with what, you know, the structure that you're on. So from that, I can understand it. And then there's some people who really sees this as something positive to begin with, which I can't identify with that. But you know, to each his own. Um, but I think that's the primarily driving factor. And a lot of that goes to the misunderstanding, the lack of understanding of what schizophrenia truly is. And it's more when they're making it more about the biology, the brain chemicals, and it's not that at all. It's not that at all, right? That's just merely as I stated in previous videos, is the effect of an action, right? And it's the cause, and the cause is really where we need to look at. And if you can understand that, and you can start, and I think more emphasis need to be put on therapy, the right kind of therapy. But as long as it's just a brain chemical issues, they're gonna put the emphasis on medication. Emphasis is gonna develop a new medication, new medication, new medication. Fine, great. But once you stop taking the medication, it's gonna come flooding back. How do I deal with the flood outside of the medication? That's the way, right? That's the therapy that needs to be looked at, man. And so I'm really trying to put my stuff into words, my experiences, my thoughts, and how I got through this, because I do think it's the way to get through it, man. And I understand this a little differently, and I responded to schizophrenia different than most people, right? Most people run. Most people go with the flow of what the symptoms produce. I went against the flow, which is you know, you think about going against the flow of a rushing water coming in, right? It's not an easy thing, right? Or a strong wind that's blowing in one direction and you're trying to go in the opposite direction. It's not an easy thing, but that's the direction you need to go. That's how you calm this storm, right? That's how you stop this flood. You have to go in that direction, right? So this is how, and that's the mindset that leads to affecting this chemical imbalance, so that you yourself calm this, bring that dopamine level down that they're saying is elevated, right? So you can do that, obviously you can do that, but we don't recognize this, and we have to be told by a doctor that, hey, this is possible. And then we'll say, oh, really? Okay, well, yeah, I guess I'll start doing it now. But you know, you don't have to wait for them to tell you this is possible for you to jump on it. You know, you can get on it before, right? Because they're telling you that this is as high as you can reach. Like they told me I couldn't even reach, I gotta reach down to the ground. I couldn't even reach up here, right? But yet this is where they're standing. They're up here telling you you can reach this high. But me, I wanted more than that, so I went above their head. I said, yo, you're not gonna set my standard, man. If you're telling me I can't get that and I want that, what am I gonna do? Just give up on that because you said I can't get that? Who the heck are you? You only know what's been given to you, what's limited to your understanding. But just because you don't understand doesn't mean somebody else can't understand, and we can't understand above that, right? So that's what I went above him and got what I wanted, you know. But a lot of people choose to stay beneath that and want to be dictated to by people who got, you know, a little label of doctor and, you know, degrees and all that, and they think that is the authority of all knowledge and wisdom and understanding, and so you get stuck in that, and now you're living in that and trying to make yourself comfortable, and they want to make you comfortable in that as well, right? But I shake all of that, man. Mm-mm. And I think so. I think a lot more emphasis need to put more on the therapy and the understanding, so that because once you get the understanding, you realize, oh, man, you can get through this, right? And you don't really need the medication. You can, you can do what the medication is doing yourself for schizophrenia, man. So these mental illnesses. So, but again, I don't know. Let me know what you guys think, man. Good, bad, nah. Uh, Let me know in the comments if you agree, if you disagree, if you were asked about the what the what the new name would be. I wasn't asked, man. But what do you think the new name should be? Hopefully, you guys are making some progress. Hopefully, you haven't given up. Hopefully, you've been thinking about some of the stuff that I've been talking about. If you've been listening, um, try to get that understanding, because hearing isn't hearing necessarily, right? To hear, true hearing comes with understanding, man. That's when you truly hear something. So just because you hear this stuff and it sounds good and it sounds right, it doesn't mean it's going to be effective in your life. You've got to really hear something that's true. It means you put it into practice because you have the understanding of what needs to be done. So sometimes in order to have the understanding, you have to think about it. You have to listen. You got to listen. You got to chew on it. You got to think about it, right? Until it goes from here. That's just the mental, the you know, um, just the word to the open up, right? So you can see it, and then you grasp it, and then that's when it'll cause, it'll make that important change in your life. It'll cause you to produce something, right? But as long as it's just hearing and it sounds good and it sounds true, but as far as it goes, then it's not going to be effective, right? You're not going to make those lasting changes, and you're going to just fall off down the road. Um, which is why they have medications, right? Because a lot of people just fall off, they give up. And so I'm saying, man, hopefully you have that understanding. Hopefully you making those gains. Hopefully you're able to just take on schizophrenia in a meaningful way. And anyway, enjoy yourselves, and I'll talk to you again later.